Jackson Podcast.
Thank y'all for tuning in to my show. On this episode, we're going to talk about some things that the American people are very, very passionate about. And if this is something that can happen, can we replace the income tax system with the tariff system? Can we replace the internal revenue services with the external revenue services? If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and the like button to help me get into the algorithm. I greatly appreciate it. But let me play the video and then we're going to further the conversation. Let's get to it.
Besant is also sounding the alarm on what he calls an impending economic calamity. He is urging lawmakers to extend key provisions of the Trump tax cuts and Jobs Act. The stakes, of course, couldn't be higher. Millions of jobs, billions in lost wages could be lost if the tax cuts expire in December. And Republicans are mobilizing. Speaking at the GOP retreat in Florida, President Trump doubled down on his message: cut taxes for the American people. He even floated the idea of abolishing the federal income tax altogether.
You know, the United States in 1870 to 1913, all tariffs, and that was the richest period in the history of the United States. The income tax came in 1913. As I said in my speech last week, instead of taxing our citizens to enrich foreign nations, we should be tariffing and taxing foreign nations to enrich our citizens.
The president says that he plans to impose tariffs on a list of imports: steel, aluminum, copper, computer chips, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, all to boost domestic production. This is a very aggressive economic agenda, but it's also really exciting also. Let's just keep with the tariffs for a moment, since that's where we end.
You know, listening to him speak right there, cutting taxes sound like what he plans on doing. And that's what he's interested in. Abolishing taxes sounds like an idea. It doesn't sound like it's fully thought out. And if you're going to do things this massive, I think that they need to be fully thought out, because it could change the whole trajectory of the country.
Ended. This is a strategy, Brian, that he tried previously. They weren't able to see it through in the last administration. It's one that takes time. He's going back to do it again.
Well, loves tariffs. Tariffs, I think, is his favorite word in the dictionary, he said. Not surprising that he's talking about doing a universal tariff. But I love Kevin Hassett. I think he's my favorite economic guy in the administration, the happy warrior. And he makes such a good point. He says, when these guys talk about tariffs, they ignore all the other policies that we want to do, just like they did in the first Trump term. And if you think back to that term, we got some tariffs, but we got all sorts of supply side pro-growth policies. And that's exactly what the president is talking about now. I mean, folks, he just said, let's eliminate the income tax. Now, I don't know if that's going to get done, but the fact that he's even talking that way tells me this is a guy who does not want to punish work. And that's the biggest thing.
Dagan, what about the federal freeze? That's also huge news today, and Schumer pushing back.
I'm going to stop it right there again, because he caught my attention when he said that Trump is a guy who does not want to punish work. You know, people got relaxed and lackadaisical up under Biden administration. I heard so many people talking about, I want a work from home job. I don't like my job. I don't want to work. I hate working. This and that. Why do I got to go to work every day? You know, if he do get around to where the taxes from the federal government is totally abolished, it should make people want to work even more. It should make people want to be a productive member to society. I understand, you know, people don't want to work, but leave, man. Leave the country. This ain't the place for you. You know, this is a capitalist system that is just a servicing goods, and you got to be able to produce. If you're not producing, this may not be the place for you. Complaining about not being productive, then this may not be the place for you. Real talk.
It is big news, and particularly digging into the grant issue. But to stay on the tariff thing, Kenny, so let's connect all the big players in this and what they're saying. Kevin Hassett on Kudlow yesterday said tariffs are not just a weapon, but part of a supply side strategy as part of a tax bill. And Larry Kudlow himself has talked about, let's think about a 10% across the board tariff. We have $5 trillion in imports. And so you're talking about $500 billion to finance tax cuts here. So you are taxing foreign firms, your foreign manufacturers, and then giving individuals, you, and corporations here a tax cut potentially. And then there's the Financial Times article about Scott Bessent saying something that Scott Bessent is pushing for new universal tariffs on U.S. imports starting at 2.5%. This is taking shape. The biggest problem is the Republicans in the House. They control the purse strings. They will be writing this tax reform bill, and there are 48 of them who didn't show up at Doral. What in the hell is wrong with y'all?
Well, speaking of taxes, the agenda is very aggressive. He's already talking about bringing the corporate tax rate down, Taylor, not taxing Social Security, overtime, and tips. He wants to extend the 2017 tax cuts, but the CBO says if you do that, it's going to add $4 trillion over a decade to the deficit. So that's a problem. He says it might be offset by the tariffs. What do you think?
You know me. If I'm looking at the bond market, all I can think about is the debt and the deficit and how we tackle this. So the bond vigilantes don't come out and scream at us. So I love that you brought up the deficit. But I think, Jackie, as we've been talking about on this show, those tax cuts have to be number one priority because that was the mandate from the voters. So I think you have to get that done and find revenue elsewhere. Is that revenue 2.5%, as Dagan mentioned, what Scott Bessent laid out? What's interesting about that in terms of a revenue source is, to me, markets like certainty. So if you tell me 10% tariff, if I'm a company like GM, I can handle that. If you tell me that every month it's going up by 2.5%, I have a hard time planning around that because how do I figure out, do I buy the goods now? What if the tariffs go up? Is it a negotiating tool? Is it going up? And so Scott Bessent is the smartest person in the room. Do not get me wrong. But some of that makes me nervous when you think about just those monthly increments.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up the market and the reaction to it, Kenny. That's where I want to bring you in. Obviously, we had a rough day yesterday. We're dealing with that AI story. That's part of the issue. But the markets have been up since Trump has come into office. Even though we started the year on a little bit of a down note, tells me that investors are very optimistic about this.
I think they're very optimistic. And I hear it when I'm talking to people. I'm very optimistic about what the future holds and what all these policy holds. And actually, this whole idea about eliminating the income tax or redefining it and coming in with, kind of a 10% tariff tax and giving an income tax break to Americans encourages them to work more, in my opinion, encourages them then to spend more, in my opinion. So then you end up having a stronger and better economy. I think the market likes it. I think it's clear. I think yesterday's action in the market was a separate issue.
Yeah.
Although we could say that the market needs to pull back a little bit because maybe it's a little bit stretched, and that's fine. But yesterday's action, I think, was completely a whole different issue.
Allow me to
Hold on, what she got to say? I'm going to let her finish.
apologize for Woodrow Wilson, fellow Virginian, who was the president who implemented the income tax.
Woodrow Wilson, I thought it was Theodore Roosevelt. I got my information wrong. So Woodrow Wilson is the one that implemented the income tax based upon what she said. What y'all say in the comment section? Now, I got to do my research because I thought it was Theodore Roosevelt. But, I got a few takes from that because she said that if they raised it to a 2.5 tariff, that would bring in $500 million annually. So right now, the federal income taxes on us is $2.4 trillion annually. That is not enough money to abolish taxes. Then we'll be losing money. You know that they ain't about that. The government and Trump is not about losing money. So the tariffs will have to be much higher. By them being much higher, I would think that this would start a trade war. Because if you're going to make our goods much higher and we getting imports, what you think they're going to do? You don't think that they're strategizing and remaining silent about what they're going to do? We speaking out loud to the world. The world can hear and watch the news and all of these things that is being talked about on the massive media. If he could do this, though, I think Trump could go down as the greatest president ever if he successfully does this. But I highly doubt that this is going to happen now after me doing my research and things. But another thing that I would also like to say about this is that if this goes through, employers would employers would reduce base wages to offset the cost that these taxes are doing. They will reduce the base wages. The last thing that I'm going to say about this, besides talking about it being a trade war and everything, though, this would make the goods skyrocket. You know, because are we getting things at a higher price? We will have to be receiving them at a higher price. So your check may be bigger, but your items may be more expensive. You know, this is a great idea from Trump. If he can successfully do it, he will go down as the greatest president of all time. But if he can't successfully do it, then he need to talk to his team and everything and try to find a smart way to do something else and just reduce taxes. And I think the American people will be just as satisfied with that as if it was a zero tax. I appreciate y'all tuning in to my show, man. Peace, love, plenty, abundance. Make sure you go get you some money, and I'm gone.
The Trevor Jackson Podcast.